And outside, there are 6 unique stats that players can use to gain an upper hand, those being intelligence, power, defense, mobility, HP, and stealth. While no one stat is outright better than any of the others, it is impossible to deny that over the numerous patches and updates, certain stats have become more popular among the player base rather than others. Currently, in the Anthropocene update, that fashionable stat is intelligence. In this guide, we'll look at the tier list for intelligence builds in order to determine which animals use intelligence the best and how they use it. We'll also be looking into some of the history and benefits of using intelligence, particularly how it benefits certain behaviors such as group activities and learning. Let's get started by looking at F tier. Now, any animal without a brain is basically an F tier by default. These include sea sponges, sea jellies, corals, which basically anything that makes you ask, is that really an animal as opposed to a plant, fungus, or a rock? A common trait among these critters is a lack of self-propelled motility, which is the inability to make yourself move. Some of these animals can move in their larval stage or when absolutely necessary to avoid predators, but these guys are pretty much AFK 24/7. We also see the lack of bilateral symmetry in many of these animals, which is a fancy way of saying that we don't have a left and right side, like humans do. Lack of bilateral symmetry is crucial for the formation of a central nervous system. Since most of these builds in F tier don't really have heads, then you wouldn't really expect brains to form. Notice how, in humans, for example, many of our senses are right by the brain, such as our eyes for seeing, our ears for hearing, our nose for smelling, and our mouth and tongue for tasting. This concentration of our senses is needed for brains to form. Since this is a video about our understanding of the game's intelligence and behavior, we won't spend too much time in the lower tiers. But there are a few interesting outliers that I would like to mention. Perhaps one of the most interesting outliers in F tier is from the Echinoderm organization, the sea star, sometimes referred to as the starfish. While not having a formal brain, the starfish has its nervous system based around its mouth on the underside. We can see this in the rightmost image. This somewhat centralized nervous system is far different from the previous sea sponges that we saw and can lead to some interesting behavior, such as the ability to smell and taste water, as well as to chase and pursue prey, as we see in the leftmost picture. While these starfish don't exactly have legs, they have hundreds of little leg-like appendages that they can use to move around, which is far more than a lot of the other builds in F tier. While the starfish can move at all stages of life and can even hunt low-level defense players, the lack of a brain really limits what behaviors a starfish is capable of. Still, it is enough for it to reach the top of the F tier. TLDR, F tiers are the type of characters that your grandma would pick because the only thing she needs to know how to do is click the start button. Moving on, and we have D tier. D tiers are very similar to their counterparts in F tier, except that these builds decided to spec into the cephalization perk, which leads to the formation of brains. Many of these builds still behave very similar to the starfish, but have more developed senses and can better react to these senses because of the addition of a brain. This may sound like a big jump, but the presence of a brain doesn't correlate to complex or interesting behavioral gameplay, without investing a lot into different lobes and structures. Most players in the invertebrate class, which includes snails, clams, insects, spiders, and worms, will typically fall into either D tier or F tier. In this sense, the D tier and F tier like to blur together and overlap a bunch, as we just saw in the starfish. This is common in a lot of builds situated highly or lowly in a tier, which is to be expected. This tier list is in no way definitive because it is slightly impossible to perfectly rank every species into 6 simple categories, but it does work as a good generalization and thought exercise. Now, some of my younger viewers may be confused about the word hermaphrodite. Well, to put it simply, a hermaphrodite is basically any build which doesn't force you into selecting male or female at the character customization screen. As we go up to the tier list, we'll start to see fewer and fewer characters deciding to spec into this hermaphroditic ability, so keep an eye out on that. Now, let's show you all a few examples of the C tier. In the C tier, organisms start to become larger on average, both in brain size and in body size. Many of these animals can only understand what they have directly experienced in the past, both because their species lack the group communities where pros can teach noobs about how the game works, as well as the C tier animals lacking the proper brain power needed to predict and plan. However, practically all of the individuals in the C tier have the perks of acclimation, desensitization, conditioning, and habituation to certain stimuli. Now, for those of you who don't understand what these terms mean, they're basically all learned behaviors. So we'll start by giving a definition and an example. Acclimation is the responding to a change of environment by changing a factor, typically in the behavior or physiology of an animal. This can include something as simple as humans shivering and sweating when the temperature becomes hotter or colder outside. This is very common, and it's almost necessary for any animal in a biome which exhibits variation in the temperature, humidity, pH, etc. Desensitization is the tuning out, for lack of a better word, of important information. One of the best examples we can give is with you right now. Could you feel what's in your pocket or what you're sitting on right now? How about 10 seconds ago? Your brain tends to desensitize this information unless you're consciously thinking about it. Next up is conditioning. Conditioning is the association of one stimuli with its being associated with another separate stimuli. This is often seen in animals such as house cats begging for food when they hear the rummaging of a bag which has cat food in it. Other more natural examples include animals coming out in the rain being the stimuli, for what is possibly opportunities. Worms, for example, like to use the rain as a chance to move from place to place on the ground instead of underground because they can stay hydrated above ground during the rain. Finally, we have habituation, which is not responding to a cue after repeated exposure. This one is a bit harder to describe, but if any of you have ever been out deep in the country, what you'll typically find are that the birds there are more scared of automobiles. The next time you drive down an old abandoned country road, check to see the birds on power lines or in nearby trees and how they react to your car. Another important attribute of C tiers is that we start to see sexual dimorphism. Excuse me. Sexual dimorphism is defined as the characteristic of a build to have distinct differences based on sex. TLDR, sexual dimorphism is a fancy way of saying that boys and girls look and behave differently. I'm sure that many of my viewers have experienced many examples of sexual dimorphism in their everyday lives without ever noticing it, but here are a few examples to help you wrap your head around the concept. First off, we have male deer, which grow antlers, as opposed to the female deers, which do not. Right next to that, we have this red-winged blackbird, which is known for its sexually dimorphic feather coloration. Males tend to be brighter and blacker, as we can see on the right bird, and the left bird is the female, which is more brown and white and blends in better. Next up, we have the anglerfish. This is the same fish that we see in the movie Finding Nemo, which uses a light-based lure on the top of its forehead to lure prey to come close before swallowing them whole. This is only found in female anglerfish, while male anglerfish, which are being pointed at by the arrow, are typically much smaller and more bland in comparison. Finally, humans are a very common example of sexual dimorphism, particularly in our behavior. Overall, letting your build have sexual dimorphism causes big changes in your body that makes your build different from the other gender. These differences in our body means that we act differently with effects to our behavior. For example, we see deer with antlers compete with each other over the attention of female players, but we don't typically see antler-less females competing like this over male deer players. This can be explained by sexual dimorphism resulting in different actions, wants, needs, and thoughts in different genders, which is a hallmark of C tier. Remember, variation in behavior is key if you want to escape the bottom tiers, so keep that in mind when preparing for your next playthrough. Moving on, we have the B tier. B tier is where we start to see teams being formed between separate players and where new group strategies are formed. While groups would occasionally appear in previous tiers, most of these were for ganging up during inhospitable winter months or just finding a mate during mating season. B tier builds take group behavior to a whole new level, as many of these players spend significant time interacting with others of the same species. As such, higher intelligence is needed to be tolerant of others because practically any group in which the individuals are constantly fighting with each other is almost certain to fail. While it can be stressful to live in a group for a long time, I find that the benefits are often more than worth it. Larger groups are great at defending important locations like nests or nurseries, as well as dispelling unwanted players from entire ecosystems. Groups are also great at splitting up to find more resource spawns, as well as being better suited to dispel or confuse potential predators with their sheer numbers. Perhaps the most busted ability available to B tier is team hunting. Hunting in a team completely flips up the standard matchup charts and can help your team take down players that you have no chance of beating in a 1v1. We call most of these strategies to be cooperative because of the mutual benefits to the player who does the action and to the recipient. This is the basis for all group strategies and for animals forming groups to begin with. For example, hippos who work together to do so out of mutual interest. Hippo players need rivers to cool themselves down and to complete the reproduction side quest. So separate hippos will work together to attack and get rid of crocodiles because it's too difficult for a single hippo to control enough space on its own. This is similar to when lions hunt in packs. Although you need to share the loot from your elimination with your team, it may be beneficial to pool all of your resources together to take down a single giant experienced water buffalo player instead of griefing baby gazelle players. One of the most important abilities that cooperative players can have is the ability to detect other players running similar builds. The flock of birds shown is only useful when you're certain that you won't just add a hawkmane to your party and that he won't just eliminate you the instant you both spawn. Group players need to be able to recognize each other to an extent. You see, there are some diminishing returns. Oftentimes, builds that are close enough to yours are good enough to team up with because it would be a waste of resources, particularly in the mind and consciousness, or potential danger to your species to abandon them. We can see this in sparrows raising newbies, playing other sparrow builds, while the resulting hybrids aren't always spectacular. The intention is still admirable. Another topic worth mentioning is how group play allows for the development of altruism. Altruism is defined as a social interaction that hurts the actor, but really helps out the recipient of the altruism. It's basically like being nice, but you get punished for it. While many of you out there may be telling yourselves, what? Who would do something like that? There are many examples of altruistic behavior in the wild, particularly as we make our way higher up the tier list. The B tier case study for this is the prairie dog. These are scampering, digging ground squirrels, which are very common out in the plains and prairies of North America. Maybe you've seen them before. Prairie dogs are known for living in large colonies where they dig underground to make large interconnected homes called burrows. Prairie dogs will also groom each other and look after one another. This sounds very cooperative so far, right? Not really altruistic? Well, prairie dogs have been recorded screeching and calling at predators to attract their attention so that other prairie dogs, which are not paying attention and are busy grazing, can retreat safely to their burrows. This means that a screeching prairie dog warning its friends and family will occasionally lose and be caught by the predator while trying to protect its teammates. Why would a player do this? Well, the answer comes down to the importance of family. If you sacrifice yourself, but the rest of your group is able to get away and stay safe, then this is actually a good action to take. Since prairie dogs rely heavily on their teammates throughout their lives, sacrificing yourself so that the team can still complete the main mission can do more good than harm in the long run. Other examples of this will be seen in the higher tiers, particularly in S tier, so let's not dawdle and keep moving on. We're at A tier now and we're almost done. This is where most of the really amazing stuff is concentrated, so I'll speed through some definitions so that we can get into some examples quicker. Now, A tiers are pretty similar to the B tiers, but the perception of the human player base towards these animals in A tier is generally higher. This is because many builds in A tier have at least one ability that is incredibly rare in terms of the animal kingdom. Stuff like tool use or language is what really gets human mains impressed, but sometimes we just see really good tactics that are refined and honed from B tier. Remember how just a bit ago I was talking about how awesome team hunting was in B tier? Well, A tier dolphins make that look like child's play. Behold, the bait ball. Dolphins typically fish and hunt fish by making these structures called bait balls. Dolphin pods collaborate and slowly constrict the school of fish into a tight sphere where the fish have nowhere to escape. Coordinated efforts by the dolphins, along with lots of communication and language, can then push the ball up to the surface where the fish run out of places to swim and become easy defeats and become easy kills for the dolphins. One behavior not seen in B tier is the mourning of teammates. Elephants are well known for this and will sometimes trek for miles and miles just to reach the remnants of an old mentor or friend. Once there, they will touch the bones, cover up their remains with dirt and leaves, and just generally seem depressed. It's a remarkably unique trait that just shows you how emotionally connected these animals can become over their 50-plus year lifespans. So, those are some of the examples out of the way, but what about this applies to all A tiers? Data miners have found that many builds, not just humans, can perform seemingly anthropomorphic tasks, such as using tools or solving problems. Data miners have also found that some non-human animals can recognize themselves in the mirror and thus have some level of self-cognition. To check if animals can recognize themselves in a mirror, data miners will often mod a character's skin or model to include something like a white X while they are logged out, and then place the animal in front of a mirror. Then, once the player logs back in, the data miner will see how long it takes for an individual to realize the swap to their palettes. This is typically called the mark test and can be seen on an elephant in the top left. It's a surprisingly difficult test to pass when you aren't expecting it, because it requires high-level cognition skills as a prerequisite to understand the mirror, as well as great perception skills to find the X and understand that it's just a mark. Without both of these things, players will usually interpret the mirrors as an opponent wanting to do PvP, often to amusing effects to the data miners. Other data miners suggest that the ability to speak or communicate in ways that other players outside of their guild have no hope of understanding is the true cutoff for A tier. One of the pioneers of this strategy is dolphins, who have their own method of clicks, whistles, and rings in order to communicate with other dolphins. All of these are very unique traits seen only in the top tiers, but which one is the cutoff point? Well, that's a bit hard to say. Many characters within a guild have varying levels of proficiency in many of these areas. In the Simian Guild, for example, only bonobos, orangutans, and humans have definitively passed the mark test. Chimps and gorillas are usually pretty aggressive with the mirror, but some of the best players of these builds can sometimes recognize them. Most simians that are not great apes tend to always fail. This includes things like spider monkeys, squirrel monkeys, any monkey, really, as well as siamangs and other non-great apes. Another interesting case can be seen in elephants, which tend to fluctuate in their ability to recognize themselves during the mark test. Even humans can sometimes be fooled by a mirror, as very young infants typically lack the self-cognition skills needed to recognize themselves. Maybe the ability to learn and teach information to noobs is what really separates animals from the pack. In unconventional high tier are songbirds, but they still teach their young along with the best mammals and corvids. In studies where baby chicks are raised by other songbirds, they tend to adopt the song of whatever parents are raising them, as opposed to what their own genetic song would be. This shows that some level of learning and teaching is required in order for songbirds, that is, to be able to sing. But it can seem a bit more complicated than that. In studies where baby sparrows or chicks are kept away from their fathers, the chicks typically don't develop the ability to sing properly at all, or at least not in a way that is readily recognizable and considered attractive to other mates. Thus, without any parental instruction at all, we tend to fail to see these behaviors, such as singing. Therefore, perhaps learning is the cutoff for A tier. All of the builds mentioned in A tier can learn and teach, those being elephants, great apes, dolphins, and other cetaceans, as well as corvids, but some can do it better than others. Additionally, some of the lower tiers, such as many of the predatory mammals, can learn and teach through their children as well. But these animals also aren't very adept at using tools, understanding the mark test, or even solving simple problems. Perhaps one of the major flaws of tier lists is that they try to rigidly place everything into discrete and obvious categories when nature doesn't always work that way. But two things that can be placed into discrete categories are the two best builds in the game for intelligence. Welcome to S tier, where the S stands for society. In order to make it here, you need to have an obvious and complex society with many of the benefits that come with it. This will be quick because there are only two builds in the history of the game who have ever made it this high. The first is the reigning king of the meta, humans, which are pictured on screen right now. The only other build which has reached S tier is one of my personal favorites in my current main, eusocial insects. Eusocial insects include all of the following up here. That is ants, which all known species are eusocial, bees, in which only some of their species are eusocial, in addition to wasp. That means that we can find solitary versions of these. So, a very niche set of beetles called ambrosia beetles are also show eusociality. And then finally, all species of termites, which are a subset of roaches, show eusociality. Personally, I will be working with ants because one, I'm personally biased towards them because they're my main and one of my favorites. And two, because of all of the unique abilities and moves portrayed up here, ants typically do them the best. So without further ado, let's discuss and compare ants to humans. First off, domestication. First, farming. Many species of ants in the Atini tribe are known for their fungal farming of highly specialized fungus that grows within certain chambers of their nest. If you have ever seen leafcutter ants carrying back leaves to their nest, those leaves will actually serve as the food of sorts for the fungi which the ants grow within their colony. It's somewhat akin to humans using fertilizer on their plants, but it's actually way more necessary for the fungus because fungi aren't producers the same way plants are, and instead just decompose organic matter. Next up, we have domestication. Even more species of ants will domesticate various bugs called aphids, as pictured. These aphids suck up sap from plants, and many ant species can milk, for lack of a better word, these aphids for a watered-down version of sap called honeydew. If an ant tried to drink sap from a plant directly, it would literally explode because of pressure differences. It's a bit similar to how humans raise chickens for eggs because humans don't exactly have a good alternative for eggs that they can produce on their own. Next up, division of labor. Just like how not all humans work the same jobs, ants are tasked with different duties. But instead of lawyers, doctors, teachers, and bakers, ants have tasks like food gatherers, foragers, soldiers, and even queens. Many ants have their roles decided at birth or shortly afterwards, as opposed to modern humans, which usually have at least 18 years before they decide what to do with their lives. Fourth up is architecture. While humans love to build skyscrapers, buildings which reach up to the heavens, and massive cathedrals like the Florence Cathedral pictured, ants tend to prefer to dig deep down and build massive subterranean colonies with tons of tunnels and chambers. This one was from the leafcutter ant colony shown above. Fifth, baby care. We see baby care a lot in all mammals, but humans are special in that many humans take care of other children take care of children of which they are not parents. This is somewhat similar to ants, which have dedicated nurses, which take care of eggs and larvae, and will often distribute them and move them around as necessary, as well as feed them. Finally, we'll talk about the healthcare. Humans aren't the only species that have harnessed antibiotics, after all. Many ants will also secrete antibiotics and antimicrobials from their abdomens to help restore health. This isn't just done to ensure that ants remain healthy, but also to ensure that fungal farming methods, as described in the leafcutter ants, stay healthy as well and are free from parasitic infections. Well, that's the whole tier list. But before I go, I want to discuss some of the potential buffs to intelligence, which may arise in the next expansion. Remember, this is highly speculative and more so serves as a thought experiment rather than a genuine claim of the future. Without further ado, here are two characters that I think have a legitimate chance of rising the ranks, starting off with the standard C tier, frogs. Many frogs are at a tough spot in the meta right now. Human-caused pollution, climate change, and habitat destruction are starting to cause many specialist frog mains to quit the game and become extinct. However, the general stat spread and abilities of frogs are pretty interesting. Naturally, there are the physical abilities such as long jump and tongue grab that are always cool, but I am more interested in the social and developmental buffs that some frogs have, starting with sound. Pretty much every frog build in the current update already uses sound in the mating questline. Male frogs will call and sing and ribbit as a way of attracting the attention of female players who they can team up with to complete the mating side quest. Right now, these emotes can't communicate much besides signaling to a female things like, I'm here and I'm healthy. Very beneficial, but also rudimentary and bland. Frog players are known for being easy wins in PvP for many high-tier pond players such as herons. However, if frog players could find a way to signal the presence of a threat through their calls instead of just calling out for ladies, this could be a way to help avoid predation and increase the viability of frog players. Moving on, besides their sounds, frog players also have very unique adaptations to their eggs. Many frogs have some new protection systems in play, a trademark seen in all of the high tiers. Some frogs, such as the Goldie's frog, hold their eggs on their back after breeding. This protects them from being easy prey for water predators such as dragonfly larvae. Other frogs can give live birth to tiny baby frogs out of eggs instead of going through the vulnerable tadpole stage. This can be seen in the golden coqui frog native to Puerto Rico. This allows the spawns to skip a lot of the very dangerous section of gameplay and move more quickly into adult gameplay, which is typically safer for frog players. Combining one of these strategies with the type of youth nourishment system similar to the milk in mammals could bolster the social care present in amphibians and could allow them to ascend this tier list similar to mammals. Finally, the other build that I would like to talk about is the other and more exciting build, in my opinion, the crocodile, who I currently rank in B tier with their rivals, the hippo, crocodilians. Like the hippo, crocodilians, like the Nile crocodile, already like to form groups in areas with abundant prey. Crocs also put in a significant amount of care for their noobs when compared to other reptiles, even protecting juveniles from predators and personally carrying their young to the water after hatching. Baby crocs are even able to chirp in order to alert their mothers where they are, and full-grown crocodilians have unlocked the snarl move in order to somewhat communicate with other players, both inside and outside of their player base. And as mentioned, a prerequisite to B tier, many crocodiles like to hang out with each other, even if it isn't with advanced language or any of the other perks. Overall, a very high tier build that I can see ascending with better communication and perhaps a bit better parental care. There we are. So here's the final tier list after everything I have said. What do you think of the tier list? And what do you think of this, my thoughts on all of these animals? Be sure to let me know. And until then, thank you for watching.